So now I'm sort of laid out a portion of the pattern because I wanted you guys to sort of begin to see what these look like all laid out. So this pattern comes with about 5 pages of the patterns laid out just like this. So for the sake of this video, I wanted to just focus on just addressing some of the markings that we're going to use to cut. And remember, based on the envelope and what we read in the instructions, in order to complete this, you're going to need about 9 or 10 pieces, give or take. I'd say maybe 8 or 9 because we're not doing that collar. So first, I wanted to make sure you guys saw what it looks like to lay out our first section of our pattern. That's going to be the basic bodice front. So here it says bodice front, and that's just the front portion of a garment. Some other markings here you'll see are the darts. You'll see where they have the waistline here, the neckline, and what we call center front fold. So these are all important areas to just focus on so that you can understand what this is laid out and how these markings are going to be helpful to us assembling our garment. So first, what I want us to focus on is size. Remember, I said I'm cutting a size 8. So the sizing are going to usually be within these lines here. And they all have distinct markings. So for example, the 8 has larger slashes. The size 10 has solid lines. And the size 6 has these smaller dashes. So as you're cutting around, you want to make sure that you follow exactly what those dashes are, because if you go off just a little bit, now you're going into a different size. If you wanted to do in-between sizing, then for example, if you were off just a tiny bit, then you can cut like right in between. But for the sake of just beginner to intermediate, you want to make sure you just stay on those lines. So I know that this is a size 8, so I'm going to be cutting on these large dashes. So I get out my paper scissors, and my scissors specifically for paper, because again, we don't want to mix up our scissors. So I'm going to go ahead and just so that I can get a central view of what I'm looking at, I'm going to go ahead and just cut my size 8. And again, I have to make sure that I am paying attention and staying on that size 8 line. Identify the size you're using. Using the instructions on the envelope, you're going to say, I need a sleeve, size 8, or whatever size you're using. I need a skirt front and back, same size. And I need the back of this front bodice. Also make sure you cut off the center front. And pile them on top of each other nice and neat. And then we're going to focus on also getting those interfacings or those front facings to add to your garment. So right now, just go ahead and I'm going to come back with all my pieces cut for my pattern. Okay, so if you haven't run out of the room screaming, great, let's continue. If you have and you've returned, cool, welcome back. So basically what I discovered after all the pieces were cut out, you end up with 7 pieces for your garment that's going to put your garment together. So let's quickly just go through what those pieces are and how they should look. So we have our first piece, which is the bodice front, and that's labeled 1. And again, I just went along the lines of the size 8 markings to get those pieces, and you're just going to do that for all the pieces. So I have my front, I've got my back, and that's going to say 2, and it's going to say bodice back, size 8. So we just want to make sure all of those things are corresponding so we can put together our garment. Next, we have skirt front, pattern 3, and we've cut along so that we know we are keeping in line with our size. For the skirt front pattern, you'll see that that is like a long stretch, and it gives you different hem lengths based on what pattern you're doing. So make sure you're cutting the hem length for pattern A. So for view A, you want to make sure you cut, otherwise you're going to end up with a much longer garment, unless that's what you want, unless you want a longer skirt. If not, we're just going to stick with cutting for hem A. Okay, now we have the skirt back, which is going to be 4 skirt back. We followed our lines for size. We have our sleeve pattern. Same thing, we followed those lines. You're gonna see like little curve points or little points at the sleeves. Those are for if you're doing different sleeve lengths. So if you were doing a shorter sleeve, you would definitely follow those points out, because you want to make sure that you're leaving room to do your shorter sleeves. We're doing, like I said, the quarter sleeve, so we're not even going to need this much, but I just wanted you guys to kind of see when we lengthen a pattern, or we kind of adjust it. I wanted you guys to be able to see what that looks like. So that's why I left the pattern in its entirety. But again, don't worry about those corners, just cut right by them. Lastly, these are 2 additional pieces, and these are going to be your facing. When you see a garment that has a facing, that's what makes it a little bit more expensive. There's a little bit more work involved in creating those facings. So that's going to be 6 and 7. And you just want to make sure when you're looking for your facings on your pattern that you make sure that you're adhering to the size. So there's like tons of them on a piece of paper, and you may get confused and you may cut a size 8 and a size 12. That's going to give you issues later. So make sure that you're cutting the same size, and make sure you get a front, which is going to be number 6, and make sure you get a back, which is going to be number 7. So altogether, instead of the 8 that I thought, we've come down to just 7 pattern pieces that you're going to be using. So I just wanted to give you guys a brief glimpse in what it's like to adjust a pattern. And this is a very simple adjustment. They're not always going to be this easy, but this is a very straightforward adjustment. So again, we said we were going to do a 3/4 sleeve for our pattern. So we're going to need to shorten this sleeve just a bit. As you can see, the patterns often come with lengthening and shortening lines. And you want to make sure you follow those lines when you're making adjustments. For example, if I wanted this sleeve to be longer, I would either go from here or here and cut that down the middle, add the additional seam allowance, and then reattach it. But for the sake of this, we're not going to need to do that, because we're just simply shortening it from this point right here. So you're going to go to the second lengthening and shortening line, and you're going to use your grid ruler, and I'm just going to add 1 inch. Because I need that to be my seam allowance. You can use 5/8 seam allowance. Just for the sake of this example, I'm going to use 1 inch. So as you can see, and I'm going to make it a little bit darker, I created that additional seam allowance, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this excess off, and this is going to give me the sleeve that I want. But again, I went to this line and created my seam allowance. If I wanted a shorter sleeve to lengthen here, then I would start it here and lengthen it here. Or if I wanted to add a different sleeve detail at the bottom, I would do it from this point, because then I'm fine with this length. I just wanted to add something else. But because we're doing 3/4 sleeves, we're just going to go to this lengthening and shortening line, add that 1 inch. And you want to indicate that it's 1 inch, because that's going to be important when you're marking it on your muslin. So for me, it's upside down because that's the way I'm doing this. But yes, it's going to be 1 inch. And I'm going to take, remember, my paper scissors only, and just cut right off. And that's going to give me my 3/4 sleeve, and I can disregard this. So that's just a quick adjustment that we're going to do to get those 3/4 sleeves. And these are just a quick, like I said, glimpse of how you would adjust a pattern. So before we can go on to what I'm going to use as my dress form, but if you're going to use your own body, you're going to first need to close up the darts. And what are darts? Darts are just alterations to the fabric that allow the garment to fit better. So for here, we have a side bust dart, and we have the waist dart. So these are just two of the darts that we are going to be folding in order to create a form for our front bodice. So how do we read our dart marking? So first, there you have these little circles here, and those basically let you know what you're connecting. So that's exactly what these little, and I'm just going to color them in so you can see better. These are just letting you know what you're supposed to be connecting together. For the side bust dart, you're going to see here that they have 3 different ones. That's only because they want to make sure that you're aligning the proper size with each other. So to make your life a little bit easier, take a colored pencil and just color in those dots. That way you know that you're connecting these 2 size 8 darts. And it just makes your life a little bit easier. So when you're folding your dart, you need to always fold in a particular direction. So for our waist dart, we're going to fold towards the center front. And you can either use tape or a glue stick. I like to use pins because they're easy to take out. You're going to need to take out the dart in order to create your muslin pattern. So actually, we're just going to use our basic dressmaker pins. I'm just going to pick up my fabric a little bit and make sure that the lines are kissing. So those lines should be meeting each other as close as possible, because you want to make sure that it's nice and even. When you're pinning a garment or you're pinning any sort of item, especially when you're pinning seams closed, you want to make sure your pins are out. So you can either come at a slant, as I have, or you can come all the way out. They're easier to take out when you do like this. When I first started making garments and handling patterns, I had the misfortune, you have to be very careful because these rip for like absolutely nothing. I had the misfortune of always going in one direction, and it's harder to take out that way. So you just want to make sure that you are doing it, and like I said, straight out or just on a slight slant. And as you can see, my darts are already connecting at that blue line that I made. So you don't want too many pins because you don't have too much to take out. I'm going to slant it a little bit this way, and this dart is going to go facing towards the armhole. And this circle right here just lets you know this is the point where you should begin to fold that dart. So again, we want to make sure, even if we have to pick up the paper a little bit and just fold to that size 8, it gets a little harder to see the further you go up, but you want to make sure you're folding that line with the paper, being very gentle because this paper can rip very easily, and that's a whole nother nightmare. Okay, and you want to get those blue dots as close to kissing as possible, and then just jot in your pins. The worst thing is a dull pin because it takes a few jabs before you're like, oh, this pin isn't no good, and I've already shredded whatever I'm trying to do. And I always say, as soon as you realize the pin is dull, just toss it. Sometimes you'll forget, and then you'll stick it back in there, and then you'll end up with like reusing a dull pin over and over and over, and it's just frustrating. So as soon as you realize you have a dull pin or a pin that's not going through the fabric, you just want to go ahead and chuck it as soon as possible. So as you can see, we've already got that shape we want for a dart. You can kind of see where the bust area will be coming in. We have our apex point, and the apex point is the point of the bust line. So it's just a bust indication. So once we see we have that nice curve, we know that we are on the right track. It also helps to know that all our lines are matching up. And we're going to go over some of these indications shortly, but first I just want to make sure you guys have an understanding of darts. So once we've done that, you're going to go in, and with the remaining patterns, you're going to go in and close all the darts. So with your back, your skirt front, I believe each of the pieces, aside from the facings, I believe all of them have corresponding darts. So you're going to go in now and fold all your darts. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. Videos are uploaded weekly covering dressmaking, fashion, lectures, and more.